Have you ever felt a sudden chill when you imagine the moment your body stops and wondered where the knowing behind your eyes could possibly go? And have you ever noticed that the more you demand a guaranteed answer, the more anxious your mind becomes, as if fear is using questions to keep you awake at night? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are exploring a question that sounds like it belongs to the far edge of philosophy, but actually touches daily life in a very direct way. Where does your consciousness really go after death? Buddhism offers an answer that is not meant to feed fantasy or sell certainty. It is meant to reduce suffering by changing how you relate to mind right now. And if you stay with it long enough, you may find that the biggest release does not come from a perfect picture of the afterlife. It comes from a different relationship with impermanence and a different way of training your attention and your heart. Two ideas will guide our whole journey. First, Buddhism does not treat consciousness as a solid object that travels like luggage from one place to another. It treats consciousness as a stream, a process shaped by causes and conditions. Second, the best preparation for any unknown is not panic or denial, but practice. Practice of clarity, practice of compassion, practice of letting go. Because the mind you train is the mind you meet in every transition. Now let me tell it as a story, because stories make these ideas human. Imagine a woman named Grace. Grace is the kind of person who looks composed. She answers messages. She keeps plans. She helps friends. She smiles at the right moments. But inside she has a private habit. When she finally lies down at night and the day stops asking for performance, her mind sometimes slips into a dark corridor of questions. She can feel the ceiling above her and the silence around her, and suddenly the thought arrives like a knock on a locked door. One day you will die. Grace tries to shake it off. She tells herself everyone thinks about this sometimes. She distracts with a video. She scrolls. She checks notifications. She tells herself she is being silly. But the thought keeps coming back, and it brings friends with it. What happens to me? Where do I go? Is there anything after? Is consciousness just brain activity? If the brain stops, is it over? Grace is not trying to be dramatic. She is trying to feel safe. The mind wants safety through certainty, and death is the place where certainty feels impossible. A few weeks later, Grace attends a gathering with a friend. The friend is into meditation and invites her to a quiet talk at a community center. Grace agrees because she is curious and also because she is tired of carrying fear alone. A monk is speaking. The monk is not theatrical. He does not talk like a salesman. He speaks in a calm rhythm that makes the room feel slower in a good way. People ask many questions, and eventually someone asks the one Grace is carrying. Where does consciousness go after death? Grace feels her chest tighten. She leans forward. The monk pauses and then says something that sounds almost too simple. Before we ask where it goes, we must understand what it is. Grace is slightly annoyed because she wants an answer, not a lesson. But the monk continues in a way that feels strangely compassionate. He says many people imagine consciousness as a thing, a soul, a flame, a passenger inside the body. When the body breaks, the passenger leaves and goes somewhere else. That image comforts some people and scares others. But Buddhism invites a different investigation. It asks you to look directly at experience. Right now, in this moment, what do you call consciousness? You see, you hear, you feel, thoughts appear, emotions rise, memories flash, intentions form, attention moves. This whole living field is what you call conscious experience. Now look closely. Is any one part of it permanent? A thought appears and disappears. A feeling rises and falls. Attention jumps. Even your sense of self changes depending on mood and context. So consciousness is not a single fixed object. It is a changing process. Grace feels a small relief because her mind loves the idea of investigation. It feels more solid than guessing. The monk then introduces the key Buddhist framing. He says if you try to track consciousness like an object, you will get stuck. But if you understand it as a stream, a continuity of moments shaped by conditions, then the question becomes clearer. He explains it with a simple image. If you light one candle from another candle, where did the flame go? The flame is not the same flame and not a completely different flame. It is a continuation shaped by conditions. The wax, the wick, the oxygen, cause and effect. Grace feels bruised because the image lands. It does not give a cartoon of the afterlife. It gives a logic. The monk says similarly, what continues is not a fixed self, but a continuity of cause and effect in mind. In Buddhism, this is tied to karma not as punishment but as shaping. Your actions, intentions, habits, and mental patterns create momentum. That momentum shapes the next moment. If there is continuation beyond bodily death, the same law of momentum would apply. Grace raises her hand. Her voice shakes slightly, but she asks anyway, "So are you saying I will be reborn as someone else?" The monk does not rush. He says the simplest, honest answer is that Buddhism teaches continuity without a permanent changing self. But, he says, do not turn this into an identity panic. Instead, use it as a motivation to practice. Grace does not fully understand, but she senses the direction. It is not about collecting metaphysical trivia. It is about how to live. After the talk, Grace stays behind and waits until the crowd thins. She approaches the monk and says she is afraid of death. She says she wants to know where consciousness goes because she cannot stand the thought of disappearing. The monk listens and then says something that changes the tone from philosophy to healing. Your fear is not only about after death. Your fear is also about how you are living now. Because a mind that clings tightly to control will fear any loss of control. Death appears as the ultimate loss of control. So the path is to train the mind to release in small ways while you are alive. Grace asks how. The monk gives her a simple practice. When fear arises, do not argue with it. Feel it in the body. Notice the thoughts feeding it. Then gently return to the breath. And then add kindness. Say, "This is a human fear. May I be gentle?" He tells her to practice this not to force fear away, but to learn that fear is a wave, not a verdict. Grace goes home that night and the fear shows up again. But now, she has a method. She feels the tight chest. She notices the thought that says you will vanish. She notices another thought that says you must solve this now. She breathes. She tries to feel the fear as sensation rather than story. The fear still exists, but it changes. It rises. It falls. It moves. For the first time, Grace realizes her fear has been amplified by one habit. She treats every thought as truth. When the mind says vanish, she believes it completely and the body panics. But if she sees the thought as a thought, the panic softens. Over the next week, she practices daily. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Sometimes it is calm. Sometimes it is restless. Sometimes it is boring. Sometimes it is emotional. But she keeps returning because she can feel something shifting. Then one day she has a moment that makes the Buddhist idea of continuity feel less abstract. She is sitting on a bus watching people. Everyone is busy. Everyone is inside their own world. A child laughs. An older person stares out the window. Someone scrolls. Someone looks tired. Grace suddenly feels how life is a river. Faces appear and pass. Moods rise and fall. Conversations start and end. Nothing holds still. She feels sadness at first. Then she feels a strange peace. If change is the rule, then fighting change is suffering. If change is the rule, then the best way to live is to love inside change, not to demand permanence. That night her fear is smaller, not gone. Smaller. Now the monk had said something else that keeps returning to her mind. He said the question, where does consciousness go, is oft unasked, as if you are a separate object traveling through space. But Buddhism invites you to see interdependence. Your body is made of the world: food, water, air, heat. Your mind is shaped by relationships, language, culture, memory. The idea of a completely separate self is partly an illusion. When you relax that illusion, death feels less like being thrown into a foreign abyss and more like returning to nature. Grace is not sure she likes that. Returning to nature still sounds like losing, but she practices. She begins watching how the self appears in her mind all day. I need to be seen as smart. I must not look awkward. I should be ahead. I should be liked. She sees how exhausting it is to maintain a self-image. She sees that much of her anxiety is not about death. It is about protecting an identity. So she practices letting go of small identity defenses. When someone disagrees, she does not rush to win. When she makes a mistake, she learns without attacking herself. When she feels embarrassed, she notices it as heat and tension, not as a permanent label. Each time she does this, she is practicing a small death. The death of the need to control how reality sees her. And each small death makes the big idea of death less terrifying because she is training the nervous system to release. Months pass. Grace still wonders what happens after death. But the question has changed shape. It is less desperate, more curious, less like a scream, more like a candle. She returns to the monk for another talk, and this time, she listens differently. The monk speaks about two truths that Buddhism often emphasizes: conventional truth and ultimate truth. Conventional truth is the world of names and roles and daily life. You are grace. You have responsibilities. You have relationships. You must act ethically, unwisely. Ultimate truth points to how everything is changing, interdependent, and empty of permanent self-existence. Grace hears the word empty and her mind reacts. Empty sounds like nothing matters. But the monk clarifies. Empty does not mean meaningless. Empty means not fixed, not separate, not independently existing as a solid, permanent thing. Because things are empty, they can change. Because they can change, healing is possible. Because they can change, awakening is possible. Grace suddenly sees the twist. Emptiness is not despair. Emptiness is possibility. If your anxiety feels fixed, you suffer. If you see it as a changing process, you can work with it. If your identity feels fixed, you suffer. If you see it as a changing story, you can loosen it. If life feels fixed, you become terrified when it changes. If you see that change is the nature, you become flexible. This flexibility is a form of freedom. After the talk, Grace asks another question. If there is no permanent self, then who gets reborn? The monk answers with patience. He says the question assumes a permanent owner. Buddhism suggests there is continuity without a permanent owner. Like a river continues, but the water is never the same. Like a wave continues, but it is never separate from the ocean. The process continues through causes and conditions. Grace tries to feel this rather than solve it intellectually. She thinks of her own life. The person she was at 5 is not the person she was at 12. The person she was at 12 is not who she was at 16. Yet there is continuity, memory, habit, character, influence, cause and effect, not a fixed object but a pattern. She realizes that even in one lifetime, the self is already a stream. So the idea of stream beyond death is less alien. Now the monk speaks about something that becomes the moral heart of the entire topic. He says the question about after death often hides a fear that makes people selfish. If you believe you have only one chance, you may become desperate. If you fear punishment, you may become rigid. If you fear meaninglessness, you may become numb. Buddhism offers a different motivation. Live with compassion because it reduces suffering now. Live with wisdom because it reduces suffering now. Train the mind because it reduces suffering now. And if there is continuation, your training matters even more. Grace feels this land because it is practical. She does not need to gamble her life on a metaphysical belief. She can practice what improves life either way. So she begins practicing compassion more intentionally, not as a moral performance, but as mental training. She notices when she speaks harshly. She corrects it. She notices when she judges others. She softens. She notices when she withholds kindness to protect pride. She releases. These changes affect her relationships. People feel safer around her. She feels less alone. And as her life becomes more connected, her fear of death reduces further, because she is no longer living as a lonely self defending a fortress. She is living as part of a web. Then, something happens that brings the teaching into sharp focus. Grace loses someone. A relative dies. The funeral is heavy. She watches faces and tears and awkward small talk. She feels grief, real grief. That night she sits alone and the old fear tries to return. If they are gone, where did they go? What happened to their consciousness? Will that happen to me? But this time she also has practice. She lets grief be present. She breathes. She observes. She notices that grief is love meeting impermanence. She does not turn it into panic. She allows it to move. She remembers what the monk said about continuity and karma. She remembers that what matters is the quality of mind and heart you cultivate. She realizes she cannot control the mystery, but she can live in a way that honors the person who died. So, she does something simple. She reaches out to family. She listens. She helps. She speaks kindly. She forgives small things. She becomes more present, and in that presence, she feels something surprising. Even while grieving, she feels a quiet steadiness, because her mind is not fighting reality as hard. Grief still hurts, but it does not become endless suffering. This is the deep practical value of Buddhist teaching about consciousness and death. It does not erase pain. It removes the extra layer created by clinging and resistance. Now let me bring the teaching into a clear human summary without turning it into a list. Buddhism suggests consciousness is a flow of moments dependent on causes and conditions. Buddhism suggests there is no permanent and changing self that can be found inside the flow. Buddhism suggests karma means the momentum of intention and habit shaping experience. Buddhism suggests the best response to uncertainty is practice. Train attention, train compassion, train wisdom, train letting go. And Buddhism suggests that facing death wisely is not morbid. It is liberating, because it wakes you up from wasting your life. Grace begins to live with a gentle death awareness, not obsession, awareness. When she argues with someone, she remembers time is limited and chooses kinder words. When she feels anxious about being judged, she remembers everything changes and relaxes. When she procrastinates love, she remembers impermanence and reaches out. When she feels the old fear at night, she returns to breath and to the observer that can witness fear without being swallowed by it. Over time, her question about where consciousness goes becomes less about grabbing certainty and more about living wisely. And that is the real answer in Buddhist spirit. The purpose of the teaching is not to satisfy curiosity alone. It is to end unnecessary suffering. Now I want to share a closing reflection that often creates real resonance. Many people think fear of death is solved by believing the right story. But stories can crack under pressure. What holds is training. When you train the mind to observe thoughts without obeying them, you suffer less. When you train the heart to be compassionate, you suffer less. When you train yourself to accept impermanence, you suffer less. So even if you still do not know exactly where consciousness goes, you can know where your attention can go. It can go to the breath. It can go to kindness. It can go to the present. It can go to a life that reduces harm. That is wisdom. And it changes everything. I want to invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. When you think about consciousness after death, what feeling comes first? Fear, curiosity, hope, skepticism? And what helps you feel grounded when big questions appear at night? If this episode helped you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and join as a member if you want to support deeper long-form content. Thank you for being here. Until next time, do not let the mystery become a monster. Let it become a teacher. Train your mind, soften your heart, and live today in a way that makes fear smaller and compassion bigger.